To complete this particular knitting project, you will need knitting wool, weight 4 worsted, knitting needles of width of 9 millimeters, or anything else that's biggish around that size, a sewing needle that's really big so that you can sew with knitting yarn, scissors, and optionally a crochet hook. So, like every knitting project, the first thing you gotta do is you gotta cast on. Because these are very, very thick needles, we only need to cast on 40 for an entire toque. This will be a very, very loose knit toque in the end, so more of a fashion toque than anything that'll keep your head warm. So, you do your cast on. Refresher on how to do that is you go into it just like a normal knit, and then instead of taking the loop off on the right needle, you put it back on to the left needle. And that is 40. So that's what 40 stitches looks like. Also, something to remember, to keep in mind rather, is that at this stage, it is always tighter than when it's actually at the knit stage of the garment. It's just the nature of casted on threads. Alright, so now we have to do the ribbing first. We can't have a line in knitting. Well, it's not that you can't, but it doesn't usually look all that nice. Unless there's like a particular reason why you're doing it. Best to go with ribbing first. So, go knit 2 and purl 2. If by the end of this row you have done too many of one, too many of knit, or too many of purl, you'll be able to tell because you'll only have one left, whereas you should have 2. Alright, so it's good to kind of periodically check your progress. So just to double check, make sure that I have the right kind of stitches. 2 knit, 2 purl, 2 knit, and 2 purl. If we were doing a toque with 50 some odd stitches, they would be ending in the same type of stitch, which in my case, because I always begin with a knit, would be a knit. Sometimes you want that, usually you don't, because in this case the pattern is odd, even, so you don't want the pattern to match at the edge. It's different if it's a scarf though. Scarf you don't usually connect at the end. Alright, 2 more knits, 2 more purls, and then we'll be done the first row. And then our pattern will be set up, and it'll be super easy to just go on straight and knit. Oop, okay. The end one I've always found is a little bit hinky because it's not a knitted stitch, it's a circle that you made, that you knotted it at the beginning. Now you can see what I mean about it stretching way longer. That's what it's like when you use really thick needles. And technically it's the same thing when you use skinny needles, but it's a little bit harder to tell, and that's why I started with thicker needles. Also so that you can see it a lot better. Alright, so just turn it over and begin your next row. So now you can see that this is knit, it's reversed now, so it's knit, purl, knit, purl. Basically the sides in this case are mirror images of each other. So when you turn it over, it's the same process the entire time. Knit, purl, knit, 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 purl, purl, knit, knit, purl, purl, knit, knit, purl, purl. You just keep doing that for about 2 inches, and then you're ready to do the second bit of the hat. Now that you have about 2 inches, which is totally not anything I've actually measured, I'm just kind of going by eye, of the ribbing, so knit, purl, that's when you start to just do your normal knitting, and then on the other side purling. And then you do that for about 3 inches. Until you're ready to make the crown. So there you go. One line of just straight up knitting with the knit stitch. So you can kind of see the biggest difference. Just keeps on with the knitting lines, but with the purl lines, pretty markedly where it stops. And when there's a lot more of just straight up knit going up, this you start to see really turn into ribbing, and this will be a lot wider on the top here. So now you do your row of purl. Also, this is another issue you might encounter where the side is a little bit wonky for tension. Pretty much the only thing you can do with that is just honestly don't worry too much about it. It'll work itself out. Trying to fix it at this stage will just kind of goof you up. Okay, so now we have 2 rows of just simple stuff. Alright, keep on doing that for about 3 inches until you're ready to do the crown. Alright, so now that we have the length that we want on the toque, it's time to start creating the crown on the toque. Since this is 40 stitches long, the best thing to do is to, every 4 stitches, the 5th stitch is actually combining 2 loops. And that way we should create a good even pattern that is appropriate for how wide our toque is. This one, unlike the one in my previous video, is going to be adding them together from the knitting side. So you always start by knitting 1. And then, just like when we did it with the purl, we're going to get 2 and then just knit them. The reason why I like to do it from the knitting side is not only does it prepare you for when you eventually graduate to circular needles, but it also creates the loop on top, and it just looks better. Now you knit 4, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then add 2 together. And just keep doing that all the way until you get to the end. 1, 2, 3, 4. Add 2 together. This step, you really have to count. There's no way of getting around it. And the best way to do it is by counting out loud. So I do this even when I'm not taking video of it. So we already have 1. Now we are about to do number 2, number 3, and number 4. And then add 2 together. After you've added 2 together, best thing to do is to pull it decently tight, but not so tight that you screw up your tension. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then our last one. 1, 2, 3, 4. Started the count at the wrong spot. Okay. And then this one, actually, we're going to go from the other direction, because this one is on the opposite edge. You can expect this one to peak a lot earlier. Okay, there you go. And then on the purl side, you just purl the row. So let's do that. When you get to the next row, technically the count decreases by 1. So you'll knit 3 and then knit 2 together, and then knit 3 and then knit 2 together, which is all fine and dandy. You can count if you like. But I found that I don't really need to count, because I can see the ones that are already knit 2 together. And that way you don't accidentally get lost in your count and miscount. Instead you're watching what the actual garment looks like. So you can see it's starting to kind of bunch up near the top. That's because we are decreasing the stitch size. So before it was 40. Now it's 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 33. We decreased a lot of stitches on that. We're going to decrease even more until we get down to where there's only one knit stitch in between the knit 2 togethers. So just, your opening stitch. And so you can see the knit 2 together because it looks like it's going over top of it. And that's where you have to do your knit 2 together. And then after that, knit 2 together, there's 3 because you decrease the amount, but also because you can see the next one. And look, there's the next one. You can see from right here. You can see this line. It looks like a line. It's not actually a line because you have the yarn going off to the yarn ball, but it looks like one. And that's how I like to think of it. And then you put that one together. And you just keep going until you finish up the row. And you just keep on doing this until you only have knit 1, then knit 2 together, knit 1, knit 2 together. Okay, there we go. We are now done all the knitting for this loose red toque of ours. So, the next step is to grab our itty bitty pink scissors and cut the lead off thread really, really long. Because that is not only going to be the thread that we loop through to tie off, it's also going to be what we're going to stitch the sides of the toque together. So this is how you do it. Instead of casting off, because we don't want to do that, we want this to loop, we're just going to pull it through instead of making a whole brand new stitch. You can also do this with a crochet hook. But you don't have to. Heck, if you can figure out how to do it with your fingers, you can do it that way. I recommend doing it this way because this works for any size of project. So just to give you a good detail of what I'm doing, pulling it down just like I would a normal knit, then instead of making this a knit line, I just pull it out. The reason why you don't want to do this as a normal casting off maneuver is that it'll pull all your stitches at the top together, so it won't be a flat edge. It'll pull. And you don't want that. Unless you're making a toque. Also doing it this way, it's already kind of pulling it for you. Alright, so you don't need your knitting needles anymore, so we're going to go put them on the side. And then here is your toque. So you can see the line going through all the loops at the top there. And what you're just going to do, real simple, is just drawstring it. But like a drawstring, we want this to stay in place. So what we're going to do is we're going to flip the toque inside out. And then we're going to knot this down. So this is where a crochet hook comes in handy, but you don't have to have one. So I'm just going to pull a loop out, pull this through, and then, alright, so you can see what I'm going to show you again. Pull a loop on the other side of the toque, where the seam is going to be, really close to the top, but not actually the bit of the yarn that's going through the rest of the toque. So pull it really tight. Grab a stitch, make it real big so you can put your yarn through. Pull the yarn through, but not all the way. And then, pretty similar to how we did the normal tie off, just pull it and then pull it all the way out. And then pull it down like you're doing the drawstring again, and there you go. This step you can experiment with to see how tight you want it to be. You want it to be as tight as you can get it, but just how the knot stage works for you. Now, the very last step is to use this as your thread, essentially, and stitch this together. And you do that, you can either do that with a crochet hook, but that's not necessary. But there's a cool thing that you can get, which is basically a sewing needle for knitting yarn. Yup. It's larger than life and wonderful. Alright. So, grab the really long yarn that's supposed to be your thread. I have seen people stitch toques together with actual thread. Don't do that. It ruins the overall look. It really does. And it looks like it's poorly made, and this little blue needle is like $1, so bother getting one. If you just don't have one at the time of this video, but you have all the other stuff, that's fine. But don't worry about it. Okay. So, just like normal sewing, just do a really simple stitch. You don't need to do anything more than this, especially since this is supposed to be kind of stretchy. I recommend trying to sew like to like when it comes to the stitches you pick up, but that's something you can totally experiment with on your own. Alright, and to finish off your toque, once you've got the entire seam in the back stitched down, you've got your beginning bit of the yarn and then your end bit, and you tie them together. Double knot, or granny knot, if you want to call it that, or wreath knot, or square knot. Either or is fine. Don't need to do anything too complicated. And so your choices now are to either just cut it off there, which I don't recommend, because it can unravel on you. So, cut it like that. So you got a little bit. And then if you have one of these, just take it and pull it through like that so that it just kind of goes up into the fabric of the toque. That way, if it ever does start to come undone, you can just put it back together yourself. And then turn it inside out, and you've got your toque.